Every idea, every solution, every platform starts with a spark. One that brings technology to life, transforming the imaginary into reality, the ordinary into the revolutionary. With a single spark, an intricate new network is born, crafted with purpose, powered by determination, infused with unmatched intellect. At BAE Systems, this is who we are. We breathe life into the world's most complex platforms, allowing them to detect threats, drive humankind forward, and discover the extraordinary marvels that will shape our future. Alongside thousands of dreamers who share our passion, we create connections that give today's systems tomorrow's capabilities to protect what matters and create solutions where it counts. It all starts with a spark, an idea, a belief, a commitment to partnership, a commitment to excellence.
Recording in progress.
皆さん、こんばんは。同時通訳を聞くには、Zoom 画面右下の通訳アイコンで音声チャンネルを設定してください。
Good morning, everyone. Please set your microphones to interpreting mode. This is sponsored by ISIC Japan. In particular, in alphabetical order, our sponsors are BAE Systems, L3 Harris Technologies, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon Technologies. The interpreters are Field and Hersey. I would now like to turn the floor over to the Special Advisor to Prime Minister Abe's Cabinet, Dr. Taniguchi, to moderate the Defense Industry Forum on the topic of NATO-JAPAN Defense Industrial Cooperation. 皆さん、こんにちは。Welcome to our seminar. We have now quite a large audience within the history of Japan, focusing on the defense industry and obtaining such a large audience over a regular series of events is a new thing. This time we are going to talk about where the issues are to the extent possible in the subject of NATO-Japan cooperation. We have 10 minutes per speaker. We have some wonderful speakers. We ask that you keep these 10 minutes each, and then we will move to Q&A session. So I'm going to skip over detailed introductions of our speakers. Please look at the ISIC website where you can see in both Japanese and English very detailed, wonderful introductions of our speakers.
Blue ribbon no panel.
And however we put it, this is a blue ribbon cabin. In terms of our order, we have Liviu Lazar, Jun Nagashima, Rudy Preem, and Mr. Ambassador Takamizawa Nobusuke. Therefore, I will move right into our first speaker, Mr. Lazar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Taniguchi. Ambassadors, generals, ladies and gentlemen, good day, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. It is a privilege for me to take part in such a distinguished event. I'm a member of the international staff based in Brussels, Belgium. My current responsibilities are facilitating the engagement with industry, and I'm also the focal point for my division for innovation and emerging and disruptive technologies. I would like to thank the organizers for their kind invitation to brief on NATO's engagement with industry. And please allow me to start with a basic question. What is NATO? Next slide, please. For many, NATO is a political organization. If we can have the next slide, please. In reality, NATO is a political military organization, so primarily political. 30 allies, soon 32 following the invitation extended to Finland and Sweden, reaffirmed their desire to live in peace with all peoples and all governments. NATO is funded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. These principles are as valid today as they were back in 1949 when the Washington Treaty was signed. NATO Article 5, through which military power can undertake crisis management operations, could be invoked if diplomatic efforts failed. Next, please. The most important actors in NATO are the member countries. They take decisions through consensus. The North Atlantic Council is the supreme decision-making body, and the Military Committee, which consists of military personnel, provides unfettered advice, military advice to the Council and to the Secretary General. Under subordinate committees, one has to imagine tens and tens of other committees where national officials and military experts meet and decide on a variety of topics, from terminology and standardization to, for example, missile defense or emerging technologies. In addition to the 30 allies, NATO maintains an extensive network of partnerships. Next, please. Each partner determines the pay. Next slide, please. Each partner determines the pace, scope, intensity, and focus of the partnership. Japan has been engaged in dialogue and cooperation with NATO since the early 1990s. Japan is one of the countries beyond the Euro-Atlantic area, often referred as partners across the globe. NATO and Japan signed a joint political declaration in 2013, and since 2014, Japan has an individual partnership and cooperation program and has been participating also in the interoperability platform. Practical cooperation includes areas such as cyber defense, maritime security, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, non-proliferation, science and technology, human security, and women and peace and security. In May 2015, I had the privilege of meeting with a number of industry representatives from Japan, including from Kawasaki, Toshiba, Fuji Heavy Gauge Industries. They were part of a delegation sent on a European tour by the then Prime Minister Abe, and we addressed the framework for NATO industry engagement, NIAG, as other opportunities for Japanese industry. Japan's participation in Science for Peace and Security program has intensified in 2020 in two domains: the detection of landmines and CBRN threats. More recently, in November 2021, NATO Communications and Information Agency met with staff of Japan's Grand Component Command Headquarters Cyber Protection Unit. Delegations from Japan also visited the NCI Academy to discuss cyber training. At very high policy level, and only this year, in April, the Foreign Minister of Japan participated in the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting and addressed the global implications of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In May, NATO Military Committee in Chiefs of Defense session included Japan, and in Madrid in June, Japan participated for the first time in a NATO summit. Next slide, please. At the Madrid summit, NATO adopted the new strategic concept that will guide the alliance work for the next decade. Deterrence and defense is one of NATO's core tasks, together with crisis prevention and management and cooperative security. The deterrence and defense posture is based on an appropriate mix of nuclear, conventional, and missile defense, and complemented by cyber and space. It is defensive, proportionate, and fully in line with NATO's international commitments. The development of conventional capabilities is the responsibility of the CNAD. Only 2 days ago, the National Armament Directors, which represent the heads of procurement in allied nations, were convened by the Secretary General Stoltenberg to find urgently solutions to enhance the stockpiles of munitions in order to continue to support Ukraine. The Secretary General said, quote, "We need to keep working together as NATO allies and with industry to replenish our munition stocks and provide Ukraine with the support it needs for as long as Ukraine needs it," end quote. We saw an increase of participation from Japan in CNAD to an average of 15 to 20 experts per year after 2015. Next slide, please. There are complex networks and working methods inside NATO, from connection to science and technology communities, to allies, experts, and with industry through NIAC. If I can have it on the next slide, please. CNAD is responsible for the NATO framework for NATO industry engagement, which sets the parameters for pre-competitive and competitive dialogue. Complementarily, our colleagues in Allied Command Transformation operates the framework for collaboration with industry. Standardization is the primary tool for achieving interoperability of NATO forces, and NATO owns and operates a number of capabilities such as the AWACS, the Eye in the Sky, performing early warning and command and control, and numerous others. I mentioned it several times, but what exactly is interoperability? Next slide, please. NATO has been able to execute the entire spectrum of missions, from political consultation to warfighting. The agreed definition of interoperability covers all these potential scenarios, from the ability to communicate, to have consultations, to the ability to train together, and down to equipment. Interoperability is a capacity multiplier. Standards is the enabler for interoperable equipment, which is ultimately produced by industry. Next slide, please. NIAG was created some 50 years ago as a recognition of the need to hear the voice of industry. You'll hear later from the NIAG chair, Mr. Priem. The heads of state and government have recognized the importance of a strong transatlantic defense industrial base, which is capable, innovative, flexible, and agile. There's a broad recognition of industry as an important social partner. The resilience and the defense of our societies depends on the capability produced by industry. Russia's brutal and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine has demonstrated that defense industry is a critical asset and a strong pillar of national and NATO's resilience. But often defense industry is easily forgotten in peace times. Maintaining a strong defense industry capable of delivering state-of-the-art capabilities whenever needed and at the quantity and pace needed requires substantial and continuous effort and strategic vision and planning. Our societies can thrive only in security. Next slide, please. I included here several opportunities for Japan's defense industry to pursue cooperation at pre-competitive level, the top side of the slide, NIAG, STO, SPS, and so on. NATO has a number of centers of excellence, 28, and Japan has already designated an expert to work at the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center in Tallinn, Estonia. At competitive, our agencies are the main entry point. And the newest development is the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic, Diana in the center, which was launched at the summit in June. Diana would facilitate startups and innovative companies access to test centers and accelerators throughout the alliance. And Diana will bridge the value of that, helping companies to scale up their solutions. Last but not least, the NATO Industry Forum is our highest level dialogue with industry, where chief executives from the top defense and non-defense industries in the world inform NATO on their vision, strategies, and challenges. And in return, industry learns about NATO's priorities and plans. Next slide, please. On this note, Mr. Chairman, I would close by offering additional contact points and with an invitation to all participants to this webinar to share views, plans, and aspirations. Let us find ways to develop a closer relationship for the benefit and the security of our nations. Thank you, Dr. Taniguchi. I'll be happy to take questions. Over.
ありがとうございました、リビュー・ラザールさん。
Thank you very much, Mr. Liviu Lazar. We will please write your questions down and send them through the Q&A. Well, now we will hear from Mr. Nagashima with a simple self-introduction, please.
Taniguchi-san, thank you very much for your kind introduction. So I am the Lieutenant General Nagashima, and I was stationed at Brussels from the 2004 to 2007. And at the time as a defense attaché to Belgium, as well as the liaison officer to NATO, and also sometimes with the EU. So I will start my brief with one question. Slide, please. Yes, I will start with one question now. Yes, yes. This picture is the Prime Minister Abe first visited the NATO headquarters in the 2007, January. I think this is the kickoff of the official NATO-JAPAN cooperation, officially, I think. So next, please. So I will start with one question. So why is the relationship between NATO and Japan strengthening? To begin with, NATO, a regional collective defense alliance, began to expand eastward after the Cold War and became a global security entity, while continuing to transform NATO to eliminate the capability gap that became apparent with the Kosovo conflict and to adapt to the fluid times. Japan, too, has maintained an exclusive defense under its peace constitution based on the lessons of the World War II. NATO, by deploying ISAF in Afghanistan, has moved closer to Asia and has become more concerned about the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, such as North Korea's ballistic missile launches, and China's global expansion through the One Belt, One Road initiative. So next slide, please. What does the industrial cooperation mean in this process? The first question is the physical distance between Europe and Japan a problem or not? The globalization of security issues in recent years and the fact that cyberspace and outer space have become operational domains have caused a change in military posture on both sides. The next question is, where is the meaning of military cooperation? Will Europe come to East Asia to assist in a Taiwan contingency, or conversely, will the Japan self-defense forces be dispatched in response to a crisis occurring within NATO territory? The answer is no in both cases. However, there is growing a need for Japan, the US, and Europe to strengthen their alliance and partnership with a view to joint response in new areas of cross-domain warfare. And global challenges such as climate change cannot be solved by one country alone. Multilateral security cooperation is necessary. Finally, what is the ultimate goal of strengthening relations? It is to contribute to global security by adapting to changing times and cooperating to stabilize regional situations. In its new national defense strategy, the United States clearly sets a military direction of integrated deterrence, pointing to the importance of partnership and innovation. I believe that by carefully answering these questions, we will be able to see what the industrial side of Japan-NATO cooperation should look like. Next slide, please. The lessons of the unfortunate Russian invasion of Ukraine can also provide us with some important insights into how to fight in the future. Ukraine has received a large influx of their support weapons from the West. However, the limitation of the supply chain for weapons acquisitions also reveals that Western maintenance parts and ammunition are not inexhaustible. We need to rethink how supplies should be made available to meet the surging demand for parts, fuel, and ammunition in wartime, and what steps need to be taken in advance to meet this demand. Furthermore, we understand that new advanced technologies are likely to be used in this war as well, and that there is an urgent need to develop and implement EDTs such as 3D printers, artificial intelligence, and big data in the future. Next, please. What does Japan consider to be the key issues in its industrial cooperation with NATO? In short, their partnership, sustainability, and resilience. To realize these goals, Japan must continue to make positive progress in equipment cooperation. This means developing a security clearance system, maintaining arsenal rack functions, and creating a national supply system based on a contingency plan. Next, please. What is most sought after in this process? 3 no's: lack of interoperability with alliances and partner countries, equipping the inaccessible black box, and a reluctant attitude toward EDT. All are major impediments to the smooth progress of equipment cooperation. Next slide. Next, please. Why is interoperability so important in industrial cooperation? As new domains become warfighting zones and the connectivity between real and virtual space strengthens, the battlefield in which military forces operate will expand significantly. As a result, more complex equipment systems will be required than in the past, and more emphasis will be placed on data and software. Indeed, a digital and cyber divide between alliance and partner countries will make joint operations less feasible. In addition, if gaps exist among the parties involved in the underlying technology, the premise of warfare will be lost, and equipment cooperation will become meaningless. Next slide, please. So what exactly should be emphasized in interoperability? It is to improve multilateral communication capabilities and share the same strategies and doctrines. In co-production, we should also focus on our own national interests and maintain a foundation that allows us to fight our own battles, even in an independent contingency, and to promote the transformation of the armed forces in order to accelerate operational standardization. Next, please. In EDT cooperation, the West as a whole should hasten the implementation of this EDT as Russia equips and actually operates HGB, and China promotes military-civil fusion. However, the West has the so-called River of Death, the Devil's Valley, and the Darwinian Sea, and this requires overcoming these obstacles through repeated trial and error. In addition, supply chain issues have emerged from the case of COVID-19 and Ukrainian crisis, and it is a natural trend for countries to promote in-house manufacturing in the future. It is very difficult to strike a balance between globalization and in-house manufacturing. especially with regard to EDT-related technologies from the perspective of economic security. This adjustment to many require a series of exchange of views between Japan, Europe, and the United States to reach a consensus. To this end, consultations with NATO will provide Japan with a very useful platform for discussion. Thank you very much. This concludes my presentation.
長澤さん、どうもありがとうございます。10分以内に収めていただきまして。
Thank you very much, Mr. Nagashima, and you were able to do this in 10 minutes. We appreciate that. I will now hand the microphone to our next speaker, Mr. Rudy Priem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Rudy Priem, and I'm the chair of the NATO Industrial Advisory Group. And my day job is at Raytheon Technologies in the Government Relations Office in Brussels, in Belgium. So first of all, I would like to thank ISIC Japan for hosting this meeting today. Very timely and a very interesting topic. Next slide, please. So today, my role is to explain the NATO Industrial Advisory Group. So on this slide, you see that I will touch upon the Conference of National Armaments Directors, the CNAT, that's our boss, let's say, role of the CNAT, give a few or say a few words about the high visibility projects, what NATO calls the HVPs, the importance indeed of NATO industry engagement, including Japanese industry, role of NIAC activities, and then also examples of some studies. And so key takeaways, Q&A at the end. Next slide, please. Apologies for this slide. So there are some technical issues, but on the website, you will find the right slide. But this slide is just to show that the NATO Industrial Advisory Group reports to the Conference of National Armaments Directors, and the CNAT actually reports directly to the North Atlantic Council. The North Atlantic Council is the principal body, political decision-making body within NATO, where ambassadors of different nations meet, or ministers of defense, ministers of foreign affairs, and in certain cases, even at the level of heads of state and government. Next slide, please. This is to show that the NIAC, and you see the red circle on the slide, the NIAC works in the pre-competitive phase. So if Japanese industry would love to work with us, you have to know that this is not, we don't talk about contracts. We don't try to sell things to NATO. Then you have to go to the right side of the slide. So you see the NATO Support and Procurement Agency on top, on the right. You see the NATO Communications and Information Agency. Those two only spend like between 3 to 6 billion euros annually on procurement. But I'm not talking about that today. I'm referring to the left side, pre-competitive phase. So we are an advisory group in the pre-competitive phase. And Livio Lazar already mentioned the others. You can go to Science and Technology Organization, Emerging Security Challenges Division. You have the Centers of Excellence. You have the Office of Collaboration with Academia and Industry in Allied Command Transformation. So there are many agencies and bodies where you can engage with in the pre-competitive phase. And it's all to help. That's what you see at the bottom of the slide. It goes from informal dialogue up to sales, sustainment, and disposal if you shift to the right side of the slide. And it's all about assisting NATO in capability, development, and delivery. Next slide, please. So the Conference of National Armaments Directors, like Livio said, in most nations, the National Arms Director is head of procurement, head of requirement setting, head of procurement. So those are the people that when they go home, after meeting at NATO level, at home, they are the ones that are spending all their money on for the different services on defense equipment. And so NIAC is part of CNAT. So we are one of the main groups of the CNAT together with many others, and we are providing them industrial advice. And you can find all that information on that web link at the bottom of this slide. Next slide, please. So maybe not too visible, but you can find all that information as well on the link at the bottom of the slide. But NATO tries to collaborate. So when the national armaments directors come together, and I heard it from one of the previous speakers, where most of the people are spending money at national level, domestically, and they try to even buy equipment from their own companies on their territory. Well, the purpose of NATO is to collaborate also with industry. So on this slide, you see that there are many projects, and on the right side of the slide, you can see the different nations that are involved. It's not always NATO at 30 or certain partner nations, but in certain cases, certain nations take the lead and then others will join. And you see now that we have about 18 projects at NATO, going from command and control to training structures, high-end acquisition. So that's important in a few years for industry, like next generation rotorcraft is a very good example where NATO countries in a few years might replace all their helicopters. And then we within NATO are already working on this next gen helicopter, and industry, NIAC, gives advice how this should look like or whatever. So that's interesting. We are not selling yet, but we give advice. And it also goes to ammunition and CBRN defense. So again, an interesting web link. So you see, we are transparent. All that information is available on NATO's website. Next slide, please. So here I'm focusing, focusing on the right side of the slide. I would say, why should industry be interested in NATO? Because indeed, NATO is not a big buyer, but if you are involved even through the NIAC in the pre-competitive phase, you can receive that visibility on capability planning. So we exchange views on what might happen in the short term, mid-term, long term. And that's interesting for us as companies to start investing in certain equipment in the future or even production lines. So we can also understand the operational requirements from them and even the end use of the technologies we are selling to them. So within the NIAC construct, we meet with military people, people coming back from Afghanistan, from other places in the world, and they will explain us what the issues are. And in certain cases, we can even participate through the NIAC in certain exercises in the field so that we have contact with the soldiers, knowing what the capability gaps are. And sometimes we are selling things that are not obvious to the users. So that's interesting as well. So it's a win-win. So we get those operational experiences. And then last but not least, at the bottom of the slide on the right side, it's networking. So also for Japanese industry, if one day you join NIAC activities, the ones you're allowed to join, you're going to meet a lot of your peers, a lot of companies from Europe, from North America. And that's an interesting thing as well, where you can kind of get into alliances even outside NATO scope. Next slide, please. So again, the NIAC is a NATO body, so we are not a trade association. We work only in the non-competitive environment. Second bullet, interesting, we are of industry, not industry. This means, my example today, I'm not sitting here as a Raytheon Technologies person. I'm representing the NIAC and just providing neutral advice on certain topics, having industry experience. When we go home, well, actually all the heads of delegation of NIAC, we have about 5,000 companies in our network. Also non-defense companies, and more than 80% of them are small and medium-sized enterprises. So we come with our industrial knowledge to NATO, not to represent our commercial interest, but just, we are not selling, we just give advice to NATO. And it's all about fairness, transparency, inclusiveness. So we don't want to exclude people. So if in certain cases, Japanese industry is allowed to join, please join us. And it's all about equal treatment and then getting consensus. With the NIAC as a group, we try to come to consensus in giving the advice to NATO. And at the bottom of the slide, you see that most of the work we do is in the NATO unclassified environment. So it makes it possible for many people, even without security clearances, to participate in our activities. Next slide, please. NIAC leadership. So on the top of the slide, you see two people with a day job. So my day job is at Raytheon Technologies, based in Belgium. And then my vice chair is Pablo Gonzalez. His day job is at the Indra company in Spain. The people in green, so Jean-Sébastien Vautier Nathalie van Dongen, they are permanent staff at NATO, like Livio Lazar. So these people work at NATO, but support us and some other bodies. And at the bottom of our slide, important for also Japanese industry, more than 20 nations appointed a NIAC head of delegation. So I don't have 30 of them or 34, but so far it's about 24, 25, including Ukraine, Finland, Sweden, Austria, and Switzerland as an example. So Japanese could be added to that list. And most of the heads of delegation at home, their job is being the director of the National Defense Industry Association. So they are representing their industry behind the flag at NIAC. Certain people, certain countries are providing an industry representative, but that person comes to the meetings representing its whole industrial base and not its company. So that's again important for NIAC. Next slide, please. So what do we do since more than 50 years? Because next year we're going to celebrate our 55th anniversary. On the left side, on top, you see that we conduct studies, high-level advice studies and technical advice studies sponsored by NATO, paid by NATO in most cases. It's not a lot of money, but it's good to have this relationship with NATO. On the right side, we created a few pools of experts in certain domains so that we can respond to certain NATO questions in an agile way, in a week, in 2 weeks, because studies might take 1 year. So on the right side of the slide on top, you see life cycle management, alliance future surveillance and control. That's a replacement of AWACS aircraft, or also on ground-based air defense. We have pools of experts that are in standby, and when NATO has a question, we can respond. And then, of course, on the bottom of the slide, we also provide position papers, even spontaneous from us, that we want to inform NATO. We represent the industry in many workshops, meetings, exercises, field trials. We have communities of interests in certain domains. It looks like pools of experts on C4 ISR or logistics and sustainment. So in certain groups, even Japanese industry could be involved to be on standby, not be paid by NATO, but being on standby with other people giving advice to NATO. On the bottom of the slide, you see another example, a group of industry experts that are advising NATO on next generation rotorcraft. Next slide, please. I'm not going in detail through this slide. It's just some examples on technical studies we did in the past on data analytics contracting. We also give advice on NATO that they should maybe reform their acquisition procedures. There you see as well on life cycle management, very important, big data. So we also give advice now on all these emerging and disruptive technologies. Unmanned vehicles, gun-launched guided munition was an example. GBAT, we do a lot of work on ground-based air defense and on other kinds of weapons. Next slide, please. So here you see some other examples also in the, so it's in all the domains, all services. So it's Air Force related, Army, Naval, and many others. Even the space domain is coming up. Some high-level advice studies, like the framework for NATO industry engagement. You can find that on internet, on procurement, on transatlantic industrial cooperation, agile acquisition at the bottom, and COVID-19. We even provided advice without being paid by NATO. So that's what we do as well. Next slide, please.
Well, I must ask you to wrap up.
This is my last one. This is my last one. So on the left side, I would only say that please, companies engage with NATO bodies, also Japanese companies in the pre-competitive phase. NIAC is pre-competitive. Engage with your national delegations. So I'm sure that the Japanese embassies or embassy in Brussels can help you with that. Happy to have one of these days a NIAC head of delegation for Japan. And please, a lot of information that we gave today is available on websites. So happy to have you all in the NIAC community soon. Thanks. Back to the moderator and looking forward to your question. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you. To myself, there were many new things that I learned from this that I had not known. It was very rich in information content, I believe. So now let me turn to our last speaker, Mr. Kamizawa. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Taniguchi. Thank you so much for inviting me to this most important event. Let me share a few points that I'm feeling. One, Prime Minister Abe visited NATO 15 years ago. Why are we studying this just now? That's my frank reaction. Basically, the merits of this process were just explained to us in abstract terms, but let's think of specific cases. It may have taken a long time, but there may have been cases that were very successful. There may have been cases that didn't go well in intermediate stages, but that brought about very good secondary effects, for example. So specific examples, phase by phase, and the significance, I think, is something that we need to understand. That is my another reaction. So merits of the system overall, even if we understand this, for Japanese industries, it's difficult to get predictability. I think that's an issue. It could be a very small case, but examples of success in these processes and why they were successful and why it was success. Was there a systemic organization behind it that caused it? I believe that this kind of material is needed. Also, we could have examples of cases that went poorly. I think that the Japanese industry is reluctant. Perhaps there was enthusiasm, but things did not go well. Various countries, various companies may have introduced systems to improve networking and make things go better. I imagine there must have been cases like that in the past. So looking at the NATO systems from Japan now, I wonder how non-NATO countries have adjusted and how cooperation might have been successful. I think that if this could be highlighted more, that would be the most important thing to do. The second issue that I see, I believe that common knowledge base, differences in customs that might be difficult for outsiders to understand, I believe that this is probably an issue. Without predictability for Japanese industry, it's hard to make the leap. But if you don't make the leap, then you don't learn anything either. So in the case studies that I've been mentioning, perhaps you could say that here are some hints, here are some difficulties. I think it's necessary to explain the way ahead and possible pitfalls. The third issue I'd like to speak to is that there might be doubts as to whether this NATO system truly has added value. It has interactions, it has discussions, exchange phase, it has procurement. If we talk about Japanese needs, Japanese ideas, we wonder if they might be accepted. We might have to talk a lot. It might be difficult for us to get into the gate to enter. And we might simply receive information. So this system is a system to, if it's just a system to collect information for NATO, then there might be doubts as to whether it will help the various countries improve their defensive capabilities. It might help NATO. Of course, this is putting it in a negative light. That's not a positive way of saying it. But I think it's necessary to talk about the benefits for non-NATO partners. And for Japan, there are various systemic issues, I think. With the war in Ukraine, there are changes in European security and Indo-Pacific security, and they are linked mutually. And up to now, we have not needed a great deal of support, but NIAG may be for NATO, but we have to think about Japan's strategy in the Indo-Pacific, and we might need to do something similar and to speak up about what it is that we need. So on both counts, understanding the system, the mechanisms, we need material to help us understand them. The second point, on the process, once we've understood the process, NATO's strategy and Japan's strategy, we have to clarify both. It will become even more necessary. In any event, political leadership and industry leadership both are necessary. In Japan's new national security strategy and national defense program guidelines, I think these things need to be laid out more clearly. General Nagashima mentioned security clearances and how we share information with NATO and the government of Japan vis-a-vis foreign and domestic industry. What kind of incentives can the government of Japan provide? These all have to be taken care of. Professor Taniguchi talked about the necessity to create a consolidated point of contact in Japan, but an integrated approach using creative methods could be undertaken and considered by Japan itself to clarify all of these questions. I think that might be an important angle. Planning sharing, information sharing, intelligence sharing, risk sharing. Those are the main agenda items for allies. And to have permanent exchanges would be positive. I may have taken a bit too much time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Takamizawa. We did not go over it all in time. Very sharply focused problem description. So to the two Europeans who are participating, I think what we just heard from Mr. Takamizawa and from Mr. Nagashima, do you have your own comments? If so, please put them forward in response.
Yes, if I may start, and then perhaps Rudy can complement that. I think those are fundamental and very valid questions. And on a positive note, I think that the fact that there's already a structured relationship between NATO and Japan, there are policy and political agreements already in place. Those are facilitating tremendously the participation of Japanese industry in any format which is open to interoperability partners. For example, the next meeting of the NIAG is open to interoperability partners, and Japan could participate. That will require that back home, there's a discussion regarding the representation of the Japanese defense industry, and a national head of delegation is identified and appointed, and that head of delegation can participate in the meeting, or at least in parts of the meeting, and Rudy will detail on that. There's a huge difference between trying to establish the relationships from a blank sheet of paper and having already a number of policy and political steps already performed that are actually paving the way for that relationship. So in the case of Japan, we are very far from starting from scratch. There's already it's already platform that facilitates that. There's an impetus of from NATO to cooperate with Asia Pacific partners, and that includes Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. And in that context, the communication has to start at the level of industry as well. Obviously, it would be more difficult at the beginning. It requires transparency. It requires confidence building, if you wish. Is the first contacts that are more difficult, and we have to, or you actually have to be prepared for the long game, because this is a long-term relationship, and is not, as Rudy mentioned, is not limited to contracts. In fact, NIAC is not about contracts at all. So it is a relationship that is built in time, that builds upon networking and communication, transparency, and mutual interest. But I will leave it here. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございます。では、プリームさんどうでしょうか。高見沢さんのご指摘の中には、長い間、日本は話してばかり、トークというやつですね。こればかり続けてきているという指摘と、それからいざ NATO のこの仕組みに入ろうとすると、たくさんのものを日本から。
So Mr. Prem, I wonder, Japan might have to talk a lot and to provide a lot. And I wonder, they might be reluctant. I believe that's what Mr. Takamizawa was after. Considering that, Mr. Prem, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, thank you. I missed the translation, so that's a pity. So I was not on the right channel. But I think I can build on what Livio was saying, that I got some questions in the chat of people saying, well, how can we join the NIAC? And maybe that's a very important question for today. And I would say, well, our door is open. And if we are contacted by, and I compare it with other nations, by the National Defense Industry Association, or someone that groups the interests of companies, and not only one company coming to us, but just a group that represents the industrial interest, those people can come to us. In certain nations, it's the Ministry of Defense. So the Ministry of Defense is sending us names of people of industry that would like to join us. So that's for us also a good check. Or it's people based in Brussels. So, because I got questions also from people from India. So India, Japan, all these partner nations have, in most cases, representation at the embassy in Brussels, or even at NATO headquarters itself. When those people send us an email saying, look, we have these people that would like to join the NIAC, or even become the head of delegation, those people are welcome. So in my case as chair, I just need an email from someone from industry groupings, or from ministries of defense or delegations at NATO, or in Brussels at the embassy. I don't know if there was another question, but I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
わかりました。高見沢さんがおっしゃったように、2007年に当時の安倍首相が NAC に行かれた、あのあたりから本格的に NATO との付き合いは始まったとはいえ、目に見える成果が上がっていないということを高見沢さんおっしゃいました。長嶋さんもその頃のことをよく見ておいででした。なんでこんなことなのかという、どうして物事が進まないのかということを、お二方どちらからでも結構です。ご意見を聞かせてください。
じゃあ、よろしいですか。はい、私から、
Very well. So I'll take it first. I think one issue might be that even in the government of Japan and in Japanese companies, that the perspectives toward the future are not clear. It would be great if it went well, but there's the fear that things might not go well. In such cases, then a certain degree of risk is necessary. And I don't think that in Japan, that's relatively poor. In 2007, things were not going very well, and such actions in Japan may have been possible. And the need for cooperation with NATO to become more deep was also big. And this has to be changed, and the environment has changed. So what's necessary next is leadership in order to move things forward. In order to move forward, then good precedents, and then precedents of cases that didn't go well at first, but that were changed, I think should be shown to us. And that's what I mentioned earlier. Thank you. In the Q&A, there are some questions. For example, US-Japan close relations and Japan-NATO relations, whether they can both coexist. If we seek maximum interoperability with the US, which we have, then is substantive cooperation with NATO possible? It seems that several questions were posed along those lines from our audience. Mr. Takamizawa, General Nagashima, do you have any thoughts on that? Let me try to take that. US-Japan alliance and our relations with NATO, a Pacific alliance and Atlantic alliance. So from the US perspective, they're looking east and west to Europe and to Japan. I see it as a triangle with the US at the center for interoperability, which is a priority. And I think there is a foundation for it. However, there is such a thing as environment that can vary by region and perceptions of threats that might not be the same. There are transnational threats like international terrorist groups, cyber attacks, space threats. Global challenges are on the rise. Therefore, geographic distance is shrinking and perception of threats is converging. Anything to add, Mr. Takamizawa? Just one point. Up to now, interoperability between the US and Japan, it really meant US unilateral interoperability. I think that was a strong trend. So if possible, a more interdependent interoperability would be desirable. Realistically, it was tough to realize. Up to now, thanks to technological advances, interoperability has been something that we can adjust quite agilely. But design and concepts that account for, that contemplate greater interoperability are necessary. Smart procurement and creative approaches are being sought along these lines in NATO. And I don't think that that would be something that would be incompatible at all. We are at a point where we should think about systems where such things are possible. Thanks for that very clear.
Now, on the English fighter, the Typhoon, the Tempest is more frightening than a typhoon. With respect to Japan, we understand that Japan is going to be participating in the Tempest project. Now, Lazar-san or Prime-san, either of you, this project, what kind of excitement is being generated by this project within NATO, or what views are being taken? Could you talk about that, please?
Thank you. I guess you are referring to the project Tempest.
Tempest というプロジェクトについてですね。
Because I missed part of the translation, but I think you are referring to Tempest, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think we have to make a distinction between projects which are developed in NATO and projects which are developed either bilaterally or in coalition of the nations outside NATO. At the end of the day, for NATO, what is important is that capabilities are developed and are earmarked for NATO operations. From the perspective of the format of delivering these capabilities, NATO is agnostic. That the procurement or development is national or bilateral or multilateral is less important than the development of capabilities. But in terms of Tempest, there are other projects also at the European level and at national level. And I will not comment too much on Tempest because this is not a NATO project as such. Thank you.
はい、わかりました。具体的な事例というものがまだまだないんだということが。
I understood that there are not a lot of concrete examples has been pointed out as a problem. One of those is the difficulty of visibility into the future. This is an issue for Japan's both government and industry that has been pointed out. This type of discussion requires that we find an opening somewhere, a breakthrough point, both from a system standpoint, a project standpoint, a discussion to be accompanied by discussions. We still don't have anything. That's the honest truth. Where are we going to find the first breakthrough? I would like to ask Mr. Prime what you think about that. Where is our first breakthrough going to be?
Thank you. Maybe if I may build on what Livio was saying on Tempest, indeed, more than 20 NATO member countries are from the EU, and also in bilateral and multilateral fora, they are also building certain capacities. The same UK is then with Brexit non-EU, but they are working with some partners, be it even with the US. And it's good for NATO that all these people are working together and bringing equipment to NATO. And like we say, it's not only a single set of soldiers and armed forces, but also a single set of industry. Industry in Europe works for NATO, but they also work for the EU. Industry works with US companies, Canadian companies, companies in Turkey. So it's all collaborating, and we all come at NATO in the NIAC, for example. We work on studies together. We work on standards. So the good thing is that when they go home and work on separate systems, then at least they take home the standards that we discussed at NATO. So it's and at NIAC as well. Answering your other question, within the NIAC we have plenary meetings. So the next one indeed will be in Portugal, and we always have high-level officials from NATO that come to our meetings and explain what's going on. So the future is discussed. NATO defense planning process even has been confirmed by CNET that the NIAC should have early involvement in the NATO defense planning process, not at the end when the requirements are clear, but we give advice. So we are informed. Like, I think the best example now is the replacement of AWACS. The AWACS aircraft will be replaced in 2035. Already today, in the pre-contract phase, NIAC, with some experts, is giving advice on this system of systems, because it will not just be an airplane flying around like it does now with a Boeing aircraft. It will be a system of systems with ground elements, air elements, space, and this is being discussed with the NIAC. So if you come to the NIAC, you're going to have access to a lot of advanced planning and what we say, we need a demand signal years in advance. You get that also through the NIAC. Over.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you. Continuing, again, I would like Mr. Pring to comment on this. For NIAC is open, you have said, and many types of information can be learned at NIAC meetings. So for Japan's government and its industries, they should participate in NIAC. I think you have given advice along those lines. But for reference, for non-NATO partner countries, do you have an example of countries or industries who are positively participating in NIAC as non-NATO countries? I would appreciate you telling us about that.
Yes, well, I think the most important slide for this was also the one that Livio gave on those partnerships. So you have the 30 NATO member countries, the 30, and then you have many partners, including even the UAE and other people. So Japan is one of those partners. So the fact that Japan is mentioned in that framework, you can participate in all activities at NATO, also at NIAC, when it is open to what we call IP format, and that stands for Interoperability Platform. So Japan is one of those IP nations. So in all the documents, I'll give an example. I saw a document coming out on climate change from the Science and Technology Organization at NATO. The document itself, on the top, in the classification, said that it was NATO, unclassified, but also open to Japan. So my question, of course, I don't know, but this document is probably sent to the Japanese embassy in Brussels, and then it's up to them to decide where the document goes to. In many nations, that document goes to industry, national defense industry associations and things like that, or the national delegation from Ministry of Economy. But I think that's the way to do. So our door is open, and I think it's up, and that's what I said in the chat, it's up to the national grouping of industry to come forward, or the Ministry of Defense in Japan, or your delegations in Brussels at embassy level, just to say, look, give us all the schedule of NIAC, whatever, because once you get on the schedule, you're invited if it's for IP nations. So indeed, certain meetings also at NIAC are only open to 30 NATO member countries. So, but in many cases, it's also open to IP nations. And the examples, like you said, well, the examples today, since many years, is Ukraine. So still today, even with all the problems they have, certain people from industry in Ukraine are participating in NIAC activities. Also Finland, Sweden, they might become a NATO member country, but for many years, they were participating in many activities, including Switzerland and Austria. Switzerland, good example. Switzerland is not even an EU country. Switzerland is not NATO member country. Switzerland is not EU, but Switzerland participates in many NIAC activities. Thank you.
オーストラリアや韓国はどうしていますか?
What about Australia and Korea? Australia and Korea.
Well, I would say, and then I'll pass the floor to Livio, but indeed, many documents and activities I saw, NIAC or outside of NIAC, are also open to South Korea. Australia, New Zealand is mentioned many times. So again, it's NATO officials, because it's not me. For example, in my case, I'm not making the decision. So it's inside NATO. It's the CNAT and other bodies. They decide which activities are open to only NATO 30 or including partner nations. And for example, these days, the door is wide open more and more for Finland and Sweden, because they are getting very close to becoming a full member of NATO. So Finland and Sweden are getting into many meetings, but there are many activities also for Australia, Oh, I had once someone from Australia in the NIAC, also from Japan, by the way, but they came from the embassy. So these were not people from industry, but people coming from the Australian, Japanese embassy in Brussels. And then I told them as well, I prefer to have people from industry in the room at the NIAC, industry. So it's up to those embassies and MODs to decide where those people are going to come from. Over.
重ねての説明、大変感謝したいと思います。
Thank you for your extended explanation. I really appreciate it. So ultimately, for Japan's diplomatic corps and its industry, I think there's a need for them to use this NIAC channel more. And I think that the possibility of that has been open to us. Am I not wrong about that, Mr. Nagashima? I think that's exactly right. In other words, our sense, our understanding of the issue
so I think what we should be doing is thinking about what we can do. That's the most important thing. Think ourselves about what we should do. We haven't even taken the first step. And even taking one step is not enough. It might stop, or you might have to change course. So I think that domestically in Japan, an integrated organization is necessary to think about how to.
If we were to build such a thing, which organization would it be best built in, do you think?
I have one idea. In the national security strategy, cooperation with NATO is one kind of very basic way of thinking that could be written about. The concept that Japan should cooperate with NATO, and from NATO's perspective, cooperation from partners is accepted, and so we should send a message from the Japan side and to make it clear what the position of NATO is for Japan. And then as to how to proceed specifically, working groups within the cabinet secretariat could be created. And then some key people that would form a core could be assembled. And the Quad is looking at climate change and other things, and various ministries and agencies, such as the Ministry of Defense, and there are projects in METI that are related to this as well, Minister of Economy, Trade, Industry. So there could be some kind of a cooperative committee or a coordinating committee that could look at existing cooperation that NATO has with partners, and send a study group, designate points of contact. This is my personal view of how we might go about it.
Very concrete suggestion that you have given us, Mr. Takamizawa. As you say, for certain, within Quad, there are many relationships that are now taking form. And so I think it's possible to extend those. But as the most important thing that I think you've said, Mr. Takamizawa, is for Japan, as a high-level concept, we need to create in our minds what NATO's position is for Japan, what it means for Japan. Within several of the questions, we have talked about climate change. We talked about supply chain, critical supply chain cooperation. This is a central discussion. And once we have a bigger relationship with NATO, We can talk more about as we advance our technology cooperation, military technology cooperation, these things will be included. It seemed to me, within the questions, there have been discussions about Philippines specifically, and also about India. Unfortunately, we have been focusing on Japan and NATO, so we were not able to fully answer those questions. But there are, it's almost overwhelming how many public documents there are that relate to NATO. But I think that one can find many answers there. Today, we appreciate very much the work of the two interpreters to try to overcome the language limitation barriers. In any gathering, this is true, but it's not we don't get our conclusions out of a single meeting. I think that our relationship with NATO is a large topic and the biggest topic. So we need to continue this discussion. And we need to talk about a JNIAG. And we have determined to start such a group. ISIC, working with Japan, between us and Japan and NIAG, we want to create a JNIAG with a commercial cooperation to work with military industry and find ways to increase cooperation. I am announcing that today here, and in that manner, would like to wrap up today's discussion. Again, I apologize for not being able to answer all of the questions fully, but we will continue in our discussion within the ISIC community and hope to continue to have your interest. As a moderator, I am always so impressed by the wonderful panelists that participate in ISIC, and certainly that was the case today. So I want to appreciate that, and with that, close today's meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Brewing. Storm EW. Changing everything you know about electromagnetic warfare. Keeping you ahead of next-generation threats. And scaling to meet the mission. Coverage needed to advance into the battle space. Update your fleet right now. Bring the storm.
In an uncertain world, there is one irrefutable fact. Fast changes everything. When accurate information is received in real time, mission-critical decisions are made faster. When systems are integrated seamlessly, joint operations are deployed sooner. When assets are rapidly updated with the latest software, today's and tomorrow's threats are countered early. When time is saved,
高見沢大使、ありがとうございました。
At L3 Harris, we design fast into everything we do.
Well, thank you very much. So they are going out.
New
Thank
ideas and technologies are quickly adopted and delivered, with multifunction capabilities that enable flexibility in every domain. We anticipate where a rapidly changing world is heading and adapt to it, providing reliable technology that makes you more effective and able to move forward faster than ever before. Because out here, fast changes everything. L3 Harris, fast forward.